Hello, everyone, and welcome to VIDA News Live. I am your host, Dom Garrett. Thank you so much for joining our show today. We are so excited to be able to bring this conversation to you. Our topic for the show and our wonderful panelists is the debate between prohibition and regulation. It's a debate that many people are involved in. It actually has a very wide reach. Literally everybody on this planet in the countries that they live in falls somewhere on the spectrum of complete prohibition of tobacco harm reduction products to regulation. And even regulation has different levels inside of it. Our panelists today, which I will bring in very shortly, we have Kurt Yeo, who is a consumer advocate out of South Africa for Vaping Saved My Life, sorry about that. We also have Tomás O'Gorman, who is a frequent guest, I think officially the most frequent guest on our broadcasts. He is the co-founder of Pro-Vapeo Mexico, a new board member for INNCO. You may remember him from our spotlight on Colombia. We had a one-on-one conversation you can find on our Patreon. And then we also have Samrat Chowdhery, who is the director and founder of the Association of Vapers India, as well as the newly elected president of INNCO, the International Network of Nicotine Consumer Organizations. I will bring all of them in to be able to speak on this topic of regulation versus prohibition. But first, I want to just give everybody a little bit of background as to why we are having this conversation. If you were tuned into our broadcast last Thursday, you saw that right at the top of the program, we discussed a potential ban on, or at the time it was an actual ban on nicotine imports in the country of Australia. The health minister there, Greg Hunt, announced on June 19th that there would be a ban on the importation of safer nicotine. Absolutely nothing said about combustible tobacco, but there was that ban that was in place. We discussed it, and then on Friday there was a little bit of a change course, a little bit of a reprieve, but we actually released a special spotlight report where we dove a little deeper into the situation in Australia, speaking with members of parliament from Victoria, tobacco harm reduction advocates and physicians there. And before we jump into our panel discussion, I want to play just a little bit of that spotlight for you right now. Unlike their neighbors in New Zealand, Australia has some of the most restrictive stances on nicotine vapor technology in the world. In 2018, the government passed legislation creating a comprehensive set of offenses targeting the production, purchase, and possession of these products. As to the reason why, the government points to health risks like nicotine poisoning, citing a specific instance of a child who ingested pure nicotine liquid when their parents were not around. In a statement provided to VIDA News on June 25th, a spokesperson for the Minister of Health said, "This measure further strengthens Australia's precautionary approach to e-cigarettes and is in line with the existing ban on domestic sales of nicotine-based vaping products in place in all states and territories. Key medical stakeholder groups, such as the Australian Medical Association and the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, support the government's position." Okay, that is a nice way of setting up our conversation because Australia is, as I said in the clip from the spotlight, they do have some of the more strict stances on nicotine vapor technology in the world. However, our panelists also, unfortunately, are in countries that are not that far, or potentially even worse in some regards, than Australia actually is. So at this time, I would like to welcome our panel on. Again, we have Samrat Chowdhery from India, we have Tomás O'Gorman from Mexico, and we have Kurt Yeo from South Africa. Thank you so much for joining me today, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Wonderful. Well, yes, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon for all of us here. Thank you for taking the time for being a part of our broadcast. As you saw from that clip, the situation in Australia is pretty dire, and a lot of people spoke up about that. However, this is a very wide landscape that we have. So I would like if we can just, starting with you, Samrat, if you could just let everybody know sort of, exactly who you are, the work that you do, and please just tell us a little bit about what the regulatory stance is, what the situation is in each of your individual countries.
Okay, hi Dom, thank you for having me. I am involved with advocacy. I've been involved with advocacy in India for a while, and now on a global stage. We had been looking at the situation in India since 2016. Now, India already has a really messy relationship with tobacco regulation. We are a country where, we have enormous tobacco use. We have 270 million people who use tobacco in some form. But the policies are such that they don't help mitigate tobacco use. To give you an example, it's only cigarettes, which are actually a small component of tobacco use in India, that are taxed. Whereas the rest of the cigarette products or the smoking and smokeless products are hardly taxed. So we already had a tobacco problem. And then vaping came along. A lot of people did make a switch. But sometime last year, towards the end of last year, the government came down on it. And what we now have is a ban. What we also have is a black market, but first came the ban.
Okay, thank you. And Kurt, if you could go next, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you for the opportunity. So in 2017, we founded Vaping Saved My Life. And it was just literally in response to our health minister who was said publicly that they wanted to ban vaping outright if he had his own way. In terms of where we are from a regulation point of view or ban, when South Africa went into a COVID lockdown around about the 26th of March, we had what they called a level 5 lockdown, which only certain products were allowed to be sold. And those were essential goods. So tobacco, alcohol, and vaping products were not part of that essential list. And then around about April the 29th, 5 weeks after the initial start, we were meant to go through to a level 4 lockdown. And the president of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, he indicated during a broadcast that cigarettes or tobacco will be sold from the 1st of May. They did a bit of about face a few days later, and it's been banned, tobacco products as well as vaping products, since that date. And even during a broadcast last night, they haven't been able to commit to when they will be able to relieve that ban, particularly on tobacco or tobacco-related products, which they unfortunately consider vaping to be part of. So we waiting with bated breath for the unbanning of those products. Yes.
Wow. Over 100 days that has been that way. So Tomás, I know that you and I have discussed this, a couple of times, but what is the situation? What is the situation in Mexico? And if you could sort of give a quick timeline of how that has evolved over the course of the last couple of years.
Yes. Well, in Mexico, vaping has been distribution, manufacturing. Commercialization of vaping equipment has been banned since 2008, not because of express prohibition in the law, but because of an interpretation of our sanitary authorities, an interpretation that has been deemed unconstitutional for several times by our Supreme Court, but nevertheless they keep enforcing it, enforcing it. But recently, on February the 19th, the president of Mexico decided to ban the importation of vaping equipment and also equipment for heat-not-burn products. Therefore, if we had a gray market before, maybe an illegal market, now we are facing the problem that we cannot import. We are actually discussing if that ban also can affect tourists, because we are not sure if tourists can bring their own vaping equipment just for holidays. So that's what we have. We have a government that wants to ban the safer alternative, while the more toxic and more dangerous cigarette is being sold everywhere.
That's very interesting. You know, when we were diving into the situation in Australia, you know, one of the key things, you know, because they obviously do rely heavily on tourism as well, was, you know, I saw that there was a provision there that did not stop that from happening. You could still carry those. Samrat and Kurt, you know, obviously we're in a different place now with you know, with COVID and the restrictions on travel. But how are people, you know, do you know offhand, you know, about that in particular? Can people bring it into the country if they are just visiting, or is that something that is very strict in that regard as well?
Well, in India, after the ban, you know, and they brought the ban with a lot of urgency, and the health minister said in Parliament, children are dying on the streets. However, they could not take any legal action in terms of arresting people or, you know, I mean, there was no way that they could show that the ban was so urgently needed. So then they decided to turn the screws on consumers. So earlier consumption, I mean, even in the law, the consumption was not banned. But what they did was they banned carrying vape devices through airports, through Indian airports.
Okay.
So that had an impact on vapers not being able to carry their devices, which is you know, turning the screws on. It also impacted a lot of people coming, visiting the country. So they were out of the blue having the devices seized. It is something that we are looking at legally, but because of this situation, the COVID situation, the courts are shut or operating at very low capacity. But it is something that we will challenge. NNA UK picked it up, and they wrote to their health ministry and the foreign ministry, and finally a statement was released by them that yes, people, you know, Brits traveling to India should take care about this. So it's going to impact a lot of people, and they're trying to find ways to make it more severe than even the law says.
Yes. And I would like to throw this to, you know, to all three of you as we think about the idea of prohibition. You know, when we were speaking with when I was speaking with Fiona Patton out of Victoria, you know, she was, you know, saying that they were, you know, it was only a ban on nicotine, not ban on, you know, non-nicotine, you know, vapor technology. You know, here in the United States, obviously, you know, there's different things with, you know, legalized, you know, THC and those types of vapes. What is, and Tomás, you and I have had conversations about this before too, talking about how it's more of like a gray area in the fact that, you know, there's seems to be laws, but not much enforcement. Like, can you all speak sort of to what the enforcement of some of the more strict policies are? Kurt, I'd like to start with you on that one.
Well, you know, just in terms of vaping, South Africa doesn't really have any legislation or regulation currently to govern vaping. That it's still part of a process in the 2018 proposed tobacco bill. So there is no real regulation or legislation around vaping products in South Africa, which is, you know, so enforcement at this point in time, because it is falling part of the COVID ban, we have had some shops and some vendors being threatened with arrest, even though they are not selling nicotine products, they are selling CBD products. We've even had the call from our Minister of Police indicating that if he catches people vaping, or what he was saying, smoking, he could possibly arrest them, because that would mean that they were part of an illegal activity of obtaining those products. Wow. So at this point in time, it's a bit of a scary situation, because we are turning normal law-abiding citizens, and particularly vapers who just wanted to experience or at least continue practicing a safe alternative, are now considered as common criminals just for using products that they might or might not have had or obtained during the lockdown.
Interesting. Tomás, can you speak a little bit to how that is working in Mexico?
Well, in Mexico, the prohibition enforcement was very mild, almost non-existent for several years, which that made, fortunately for us vapers, to have wide access to these products. The actual regime started enforcing the prohibition contained in our tobacco law last year. They visited several vendors and they seized their merchandise. We are not aware that something has happened after the imports ban, the new one, the one we have this year. But what we have seen lately is, in correlation with Kurt's situation in South Africa, is that now the tobacco control and the anti-tobacco NGOs are looking for the local legislators, for the state legislations, to issue prohibitions on usage. So actually, in May, the Coahuila state in Mexico, one of our states, banned the use of vaping. And we have heard about that the state of Mexico, another of our states, is thinking of banning the use of vaping. So this is not only about prohibition to getting access legally to safer products. They are now attacking on the personal liberty to choose safer alternatives and to quit smoking by a means that is safer, that is enjoyable, and that makes your life better.
Yes, it's a shame when you know what you're the criminalization of better health. It seems like that is what we have happening here. Samrat, what obviously we're living in a bit of a hybrid time with COVID, sort of playing into this regulation that we're talking about. People are not typically out and about as much. But what is that situation like in India, where you have products that are that are not allowed? There's a bit of a black market. However, people are still using that. Is there any enforcement that that is happening currently on like the local level of individuals?
See, that it's an interesting question, and what I would like to say is that so the union put out a position paper saying why LMICs should ban these products. Why ban is a better solution than regulation. And one of the central points they're making is that since these countries have weaker regulations or weaker laws, it's easier to ban these products than to regulate them. What they don't get is that if it's more difficult to regulate them, it's also more difficult to ban them. And that's exactly what's happened in India. When the ban came, of course, for a couple of months, there was low availability. But now 6 months into the ban, you can still find these products and in the same format that you could. However, earlier, the vendors who would, through their websites or even otherwise, they were conscious that they would not sell to minors. They had age checks. They would do credit card checks. But now, since everyone is in the black market, we don't have that either. So the stated goal of protecting youth from accessing these devices is also lost. Also, we don't know what's in these products. So, you're increasing the problems or the troubles that you began with without actually getting anywhere in terms of access.
We discussed we were talking about a little bit before the broadcast of the issues with what are the unintended consequences that happens here, even though it is something that advocates like yourselves are very vocal about, is that when you do have prohibition, when you decide that is going to be the way to go, the next thing that is bound to follow is a black market. And it's not like it's a brand new black market popping up. Black markets do exist for many other products, but now there's one more thing that is essentially on the shelves that people want. So I would love if you all can sort of speak to what that has looked like in each of your individual regions, and also maybe some neighboring countries that have similar regulations. And I would really love also to sort of discuss, like, we talk about this idea of a black market, and it seems like it's there, and it's this thing of like a place that you go. But if we could sort of talk a little bit about what are the lengths that someone needs to go through to be able to gain access to these products? Is it like through Facebook groups? Is it, dark web scenario? Like what exactly is it? How do people gain access to these products if they can't find them in their normal stores?
Well, in Mexico, you can find vaping equipment in vape shops. They're actually they are banned, but they are very vape shops because Samrat just said Mexican authorities and maybe like in India are not really enforcing and may not have the capabilities to enforce this prohibition. Therefore, at least for now, vapers in Mexico are having luckily access to the products. But eventually, if this stance of the government continues, it may become more difficult. And it seems that Mexico and the world has not learned about the century on the war on drugs. I mean, I believe that the prohibition produces more death and more damage and more inconvenient situations or than the substance itself or than the banned product. So it's absurd. I mean, if they cannot regulate, they won't be able to enforce the ban. But another thing that I wanted to point is that these unions document when bans are best makes, or at least the consequence is that now you have two kinds of human beings, the class A and the class B. Class A live in UK, in first world countries, and they have access to safer products. Class B citizens, the ones from low and middle income countries, we are not entitled to have safer alternatives. So our lives are not as important. I mean, if our tobacco control authorities have not the ability to enforce the FCTC to lower the smoking rates, they won't be able to enforce the vaping bans. But they also are putting barriers in order for the citizens to quit smoking by vaping. I mean, vaping is doing their job, and they are banning it.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's interesting that you bring up the framework for tobacco control from the WHO. That sort of leads into one of the questions that I wanted to ask. Is the health minister from Australia, he cited the FDA and the CDC. Quite often we know that countries, like India, for instance, Dr. Harsh Vardhan is now, has a prominent position with the WHO, and he's been known to, have a hardline stance and doesn't really necessarily believe in tobacco harm reduction. Where do you sort of see, and Kurt, I'd like to start with you, where do you sort of see some of these, where does your country tend to get some of this information and some of this data? Is it typically inside with research that's done there, or is it through some of these larger public health organizations?
I really wish I knew, but I think the majority of it comes from the World Health Organization, and we've had South Africa has a long history with tobacco control and the World Health Organization. And they cherry pick a lot of the science that they want to choose to regulate any of the vaping products and cigarette products, and they are not open to any consultation or discussion with any of the groups that are interested in tobacco harm reduction. So, and by then they're not open to other sources of information or science. And they will quote a number of studies that have been proven to be debunked, or at least one of the studies they even quoted back from 1990, which is absolutely ludicrous. So, yeah, I would say the only source that we can identify at this point in time is sources from the World Health Organization. And I think Tomás said it absolutely perfectly there. Is that there are two types of citizens here, and the third world countries seem to be, our liberties are less those of what we see in Europe, and I think it's really unfair and sad, because these are the countries that have the highest smoking rates, and so the countries that have the most or the highest strain on their health systems. So if governments are really aiming to drop their rates of communicable diseases, then vaping could very well help them in achieving some of those goals.
Yes, Samrat, could you speak a little bit about that? I know obviously with it was last October, I believe. There was heavy debate. Where is some of that information that your health ministers were coming from? I know we've mentioned it before, but if you could share a little bit deeper there.
So Dr. Harshvardhan, who's now the chairman of WHO's executive board, he had been a WHO advisor for many years before he became the health minister. So he was quite embedded in the WHO thinking long before he took on this role. So a lot of influence, yes, is coming from WHO. WHO has been speaking in a folk tongue. For example, the Europe hub of WHO, the EMRO, recently put out a paper which was on ENDS, which was far more balanced. However, the Southeast Asian hub is taking a very prohibitionist line. It was one of, it actually congratulated India on its ban. So a lot of influence is coming from WHO. But in equal measure, we have the Bloomberg network, which by funding various NGOs is also creating a tide against vaping or harm reduction, tobacco harm reduction in a broader sense. In fact, after the ban, the union put out a gloating sort of a press release that we pushed through this ban, we went and we spoke to everyone. So we know where that influence is coming from, it's on record. So yes, I think it's an interplay of WHO and the Bloomberg network, which has funded a tremendous amount of NGOs in the country. And they all take that, one way to know that they are sort of connected is because they speak the same language, the same arguments. So it's quite clear where it's coming from.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit about the idea of, his name was mentioned. We know Bloomberg has a long reach. Tomás, you were talking a little bit about that beforehand. Can you sort of, how you sort of see that and this idea of, intellectual colonialism, how that sort of you've sort of seen that spread out, especially through, through Central and South America?
Well, yes. At least in Mexico, and I believe in whole Latin America, authorities are just following the guidelines issued by Bloomberg. And I am pretty confident about saying this because Bloomberg initiative against vaping is being managed or administered by the union and by Tobacco for Kids. And they are spending lots of money financing or giving grants to anti-tobacco organizations here in Mexico, and I believe in the rest of Latin America, and even to our government, or at least to some governmental branches. So yes, I believe they are following the booklet by the letter. They are not thinking about citizens. They are just enacting a moral ideology of abstinence. And by doing this, they are protecting their economic interests on still receiving tobacco taxes and tobacco and money from the tobacco market. So yes, you can see Bloomberg hand, and I also wanted to mention that it really saddened me in May in the World No Tobacco Day to see our Mexican authorities receiving an award or some kind of recognition from the WHO because of the import ban we just recently discussed. And while they were celebrating Prohibition, I just realized that the WHO has some kind of multiple personality disorder, because at the same time, the European office in Europe issued a document, which is a baby step advance towards tobacco harm reduction, because they acknowledge that non-pregnant adult smokers can benefit from switching to tobacco alternatives. So in Europe, the WHO says that there can be very timidly, but they are saying that there is a health benefit. And at the same time, they are giving awards to a country in Latin America, Mexico, that is banning this product. So we should discuss about these different stances taken by the same organization. I mean, they're kind of bipolar or something.
It's enough to get whiplash. Kurt, I saw you shaking your head.
It is.
What are your thoughts on that?
It is shocking. You know, I would have to agree with Thomas. It's some form of bipolar. Is that there will be awarding one country for a particular stance, and then you know, promoting another stance in another country. And that doesn't tell me anything about the science. That tells me about influence. And this is not what we should be talking about. We should be talking about people's lives. We should be talking about people trying to make the correct decision. You know, if we really believe that smoking is as bad as it really is, which we all know it is, then why aren't we singing all from the same hymn tune? You know, the science is there. And you know, that's what we're working with currently, is getting testimonials, is that people, and I think Clive Bates a couple of shows ago had indicated that listen to them, listen to these users, these consumers. They're the people that are using it, and they're the people that have, you know, received great benefit from tobacco harm reduction, especially in terms of vaping. Why aren't we listening to these people? So once again, you know, awarding one country for an exact opposite to, or what appears to be an exact opposite to another country, is not a scientific approach. It's an influential approach.
Exactly. And that idea of, you know, science versus ideology, you know, this moral ground versus scientific ground, you know, it's one that was right at the center of, you know, the coverage in Australia. And it's unfortunate that it could be such a, you know, a copy paste to what you see, you know, in many other countries across the world. I did have a question that came in from online, and I wanted to direct this to you, Samrat. You know, are the recently elected president of INNCO, you know, as we said, the International Network of Nicotine Consumer Organizations. You know, the question was that we saw an uprising of a lot of people speaking out against the potential ban in Australia. And we did see, you know, the health minister not only change course, and while there was some unfortunate language in the press release, there was at least the admittance that there is a group of people that use these products. And, you know, we talk about nicotine vapor technology, but we also have to include, you know, the heat not burn products, you know, products like snus that also are able to do this for other people. So the question for you, Samrat, is, you know, what can consumers, those that use these products, you know, consumers can be a tough term too, but what can people that use this to want to enhance their lives, what can they continue to do to fight back against these deep pockets and these ideologies?
So, you know, INNCO was formed when national consumer organizations from across countries, we have 34 of them now, came together to form a collective voice, because individually as a national organizations, we do have a voice within our countries, but we need to speak at WHO level. To give you an example, FCTC is highly exclusionary to the point that even consumers cannot be part of it. Thomas and I were there year before last for the COP, and we were thrown out of after the opening session. This doesn't happen even in other UN treaties or frameworks. It is only in tobacco. And, you know, this is a question of life and death for a lot of people, to be able to access something which potentially reduces harm to a point where, you know, they can lead normal lives. So it's an important choice. But consumers don't have a say in that choice. If they don't have a say in policies, this in the garb of going after the tobacco industry, even consumers are collateral damage where we don't have a voice. So the idea behind INNCO was to form this collective voice to speak together. And a big example of this was the World Vape Day, where we came across from across the world. We overshot the WHO campaign by miles. We made our voice heard. So that, I think, is really important, that vapers come forward, support their national organizations so that they have a strong voice, so that we can collectively have a voice, and where we say that, okay, you cannot make policies about us without us.
Yes, and Kurt, I wanted to, you know, pose the same question to you. Obviously, you know, the work that you all have done there. You know, what are ways that, you know, for people that may be watching in South Africa, but also across the entire continent, what do you think the ways that those those individuals, you know, can best try to fight back against these ideologies?
You know, I would have to agree with Samrat, is that it's about communication, it's about having those discussions, it's about sharing those testimonials, sharing those posts that these organizations are posting up there. You know, unfortunately, we're dealing with vapers who, the majority of them are ex-smokers, and they have a certain level of stigmatization against them. They've been always treated as outcasts. So they're just happy what they've found. It's making a huge benefit to their lives. But, you know, one of the mantras at Vaping Saved My Life is the most important vapor is the smoker that hasn't switched yet. So, you know, it's not just to save the current industry, but it's also to give those individuals that need a safe alternative to feel the same benefits and the same improvement to their lives as what those vapors or the current vapors are feeling at this point in time. So, you know, yes, interact with those posts, share those posts. When there's testimonials, you know, record your testimonial. If there's a petition, get involved with those petitions. And you'll be surprised that even having discussions with smokers, you would find out how ignorant they have, or how they've been indoctrinated, how bad the technology is. You know, so we're not only fighting against legislation or regulation or anti-tobacco or anti-nicotine activists, we're also fighting against the press. So it's, you know, vapers need to take those and have one-on-one discussions with smokers as to why it's important to them as individuals, and arm yourself with knowledge. I think that's key, is arm yourself with the knowledge so that you can have proper rational conversations with people around you.
Exactly. That's wonderful. And Tomás, I wanted to pose a similar question to you, but sort of flip it around a little bit, because, you know, I know that, you know, you and I have talked about your own tobacco harm reduction journey and how you found these products yourself to help you stop, you know, smoking combustible tobacco. So for those that are, say, friends or family members of people who currently, you know, smoke combustible cigarettes, or maybe use other dangerous products. For those that are friends and family that don't use them themselves, do you have any suggestions for ways for them to be able to either educate themselves, or ways for them to talk to their friends and family members in a way that is not stigmatized, in language that is not shaming? What would you say to that group of people there?
Well, the problem with people that is not currently vaping and that is not within the community is that they are not receiving the proper information. They are just receiving the lies that are being spread by anti-tobacco organizations. Therefore, I believe vapers are the first and the most important front in order to change that perception by having the patients to explain their families and their friends that vaping is not what they are being told. And these people should realize, I mean, the families of vapers that have already, or that are quitting smoking by vaping or by other harm reduction products, they should realize that this person is taking a serious decision about himself, and they should support him, because a very important thing about vaping is that vaping is not a threat to bystanders. So you, as a vapor, you are deciding about your own health, and at the same time, you are not becoming a threat to the people that gets in touch with the ambient, with the secondhand vapor, if you want to say it that way. So the thing is, vapers should explain to their families, to their friends, what is it about, what is it vaping, because these people are receiving just half-truths and lies and hyperboles from the media. And another thing is that should be said is that vapers and the families that are happy because of someone in their own house has quit smoking should get in contact with their authorities, because legislators are also being lied. They are not a specialist in tobacco harm reduction, so they are being lied by the anti-tobacco lobbies. So they need to realize that there are faces behind the numbers. We are not just numbers. We are people that I mean, you said I've been tobacco free, smoke free for 4 years. And legislators should realize that there are people, that we are not numbers, that there are persons having experiences. Kurt was very clear about that. We should let them know our testimonies, our experiences, because we are the destinataries of all these regulations. So their decisions will impact directly in our lives.
Wonderful. So we're coming up on the end of the conversation, but I know that we've discussed a lot about, obviously, unfortunately, some of the less forward-thinking countries and governmental bodies and public health organizations. But I did want to just ask, as you look at the global landscape, obviously we had some good news come out of Hong Kong, where they decided to not to regulate instead of just prohibit. We talked a little bit about the UK. The United States is a whole different bag when it comes to state by state. But when you look at the globe, who do you all think sort of gets this right? Who do you see as a leader in the ability to regulate well for the health and the sake of their citizens instead of prohibition?
I think we can all agree that it's UK which is leading on this, not just, and they're seeing results from it. And I've been hearing noises coming from the WHO network that UK has strong regulation and laws, and that's why THR works there and doesn't work for others. But I was just reading this recent report on black market products in Europe. And UK had one of the highest black market increases of contraband and counterfeit products increases in the last year. So it is not that UK has the best laws, but the way UK is approaching the situation, that, okay, let's transition the current smokers to something less harmful, that I think is showing results. That's why it has the second lowest rate of smoking in Europe. So I think that country leads by far.
Tomás, Kurt, would you two agree with that sentiment?
I would have to absolutely agree with it. And it's not just about the laws, and it's about the attitude towards tobacco harm reduction. I think that's the most important, and how many of the medical fraternity, the press, and some of the policymakers there have embraced it. And it's something, they're not going to get everything right, but they're definitely getting a lot more right than what most other countries are doing at this point in time. So we would all like to have a UK stance in our respective countries.
Yes, I believe that what matters the most regarding the UK is that the authorities have embraced the tobacco harm reduction concept. So they are looking forward to find ways to implement it. And you can see, for instance, this Coahuila law I was telling you a few minutes ago that banned the usage of vaping. The exposition or the reasoning in the law in order to its enacting has 13 paragraphs and non scientific quotations, or they're not citing any scientific studies. In the UK, they did implement the TPD because they were part of the European Union, but the Parliament a couple of years ago organized a committee and they issued a whole investigation on vaping. It's a 50-70 pages document exploring the advantages regarding tobacco harm reduction. So the stance of these authorities is to embrace a more human solution for smoking, while in other countries they're just following guidelines issued by maybe the WHO or ultimately by Bloomberg or by some kind of moralist ideologists that have decided for us that we should not be able to find safer alternatives in our lives. So it's a matter of attitude.
Yes.
Yeah, well, in India, they went a step further and they banned research into ends. And that was, that went, that's a way of saying that neither are we looking at science, neither we want you to look at science, because we have decided what's right, because Bloomberg or WHO told us so. So that's the there is another end of the spectrum which is quite bad.
Yes, and it's interesting to see how, when we talk about something as simple as regulation versus prohibition, a lot of that comes, people immediately go to what are the laws? Are you allowed to bring it? Are you allowed to have it? Are you allowed to sell it? But quite often that comes big, out to the bigger problem of, what is the general attitude towards that? What are the thinkings towards, science? How do you actually, either respect or not respect science? We obviously have seen that manifest itself in other areas, as we're faced with a global pandemic as well, and how different countries, handle that. I also think that, it is important, as we're talking about other countries that, have seemed to understand a little bit about tobacco harm reduction, thinking about, Sweden and what they've able to do. Again, talking about the other products like snus, which people have been able to use to also, stop combustible tobacco. So we could go on talking about this for hours. I'm sure we could. I want to thank each one of you. We will make sure in the comment section here to be able to drop places for everybody to be able to contact each one of you. I can say personally that all of you have been incredibly gracious just with your time here, but also just in general with knowledge there and fighting to be a part of the solution. Again, these are real people. We've closed with it a couple of times, but what Louise Ross said at Global Forum on Nicotine, that less smoking equals more birthdays, and I believe that we all can agree that that is what we want. So, Tomás, Kurt, Samrat, thank you so much for joining our program today.
Thank you, Dom. Thanks, gentlemen.
All right, that is all that we have. As we said, please make sure to follow us at VIDA.news. We will share out information for how you can connect with everyone. We also want to say, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, we had a special one-on-one conversation with Tomás that is on our Patreon. So you can feel free to head over there to check that out. And please, this conversation is over right now, but we want to continue to have it online. So in the comment section, if you have any questions, tweets, make sure to drop that to us. I will do my best to track down all of the panelists to get any specific ones that were not answered. So thank you so much. Make sure to follow, like I said, VIDA.news for all of our harm reduction updates. And I look forward to speaking with you all next week.